Today's secret word is grievously.
If you've been looking for that excuse to eat that full bag of M&Ms, this is the day. Every time we say grievously, eat an M&M.
Welcome to Salem Witch Trials Daily. I'm Josh Hutchinson.
This is Sarah Jack. We continue the discussion we started yesterday about April 11th, 1692.
In addition to the examinations we shared yesterday, many people testified about April 11th's drama, and we're going to get into a lot of that testimony.
Elizabeth Hubbard testified that the specter of Elizabeth Procter began afflicting her in early April. Hubbard used the standard language of the witch trials to describe the affliction. She said, "She did immediately torture me, most grievously, almost ready to choke me to death, urging me to write in her book."
Hubbard said that Elizabeth Procter continued to torture her in the days following the initial attack. And Hubbard said that she was unable to speak during the examination because Procter was tormenting her then too.
Mercy Lewis testified that the apparition of Elizabeth Procter tormented her on March 26th by biting and pinching most grievously, urging Mercy to write in the devil's book. This specter returned several times over the following weeks until today, when it tortured Mercy most grievously again.
Samuel Parris, Thomas Putnam, and Nathaniel Ingersoll reported that John Indian, Ann Putnam, and Abigail Williams, and others of the bewitched persons, were several times and grievously tortured at the examination of Elizabeth Procter.
They particularly emphasized that Elizabeth Hubbard was in a trance during the whole examination, unable to speak a word.
The men said Abigail Williams and Ann Putnam Jr. also testified that they kept seeing Elizabeth and John Procter afflict Bathsheba Pope, at which times the said Bathsheba Pope was seized with violent fits.
According to the men, Abigail Williams and Ann Putnam Jr. had offered to strike Elizabeth Procter, but when said Abigail's hand came near to said Abigail Procter, it opened, whereas it was made up into a fist before, and came down exceedingly lightly as it drew near to said Procter, and at length with open and extended fingers touched Procter's hood very lightly.
Abigail cried out, "Oh, my fingers, my fingers, my fingers burn." And Ann Putnam Jr. took on most grievously of her head, she got a lot of headache, and sunk down as far as she could, while being held up by such as tended her.
Ann Putnam Jr. testified that she saw the apparition of Goody Procter on March 3rd. This specter did almost choke Anne immediately and bite and pinch, but she did not know who she was till the 6th of March. That's when Anne saw her at meeting, and then Anne told them that held her that the woman was one that did afflict Anne.
Anne said that the specter had grievously afflicted her several times since then by biting, pinching, and almost choking. And Elizabeth's apparition urged Anne vehemently to write in her book.
And on the 11th of April, today, Anne said, "The apparition of Elizabeth Procter, the wife of John Procter Sr., did most grievously torment me during the time of her examination."
She again said that Elizabeth's specter accomplished this torment by biting, pinching, and almost choking. Anne also saw this shape hurt Bathsheba Pope, Mary Walcott, Mercy Lewis, and Abigail Williams.
Together, Sarah Cloyce and the two Proctors tortured Elizabeth Hubbard during the examination, preventing her from speaking, allegedly.
So we're told. And Thomas and Edward Putnam testified that they had seen Mary Walcott, Mercy Lewis, Elizabeth Hubbard, and Ann Putnam Jr. most dreadfully tormented and heard them cry out upon Elizabeth Procter as their torturer.
But during Elizabeth Procter's examination, the afflicted persons were most dreadfully tormented, as if all their bones would have been disjoined.
Thomas and Edward said they verily believe in our hearts that Elizabeth Procter has very often afflicted the aforesaid persons by acts of witchcraft.
Elizabeth Booth testified, "Since I have been afflicted, I have been most grievously tormented by my neighbor John Procter Sr. or his appearance. Also, I have seen John Procter Sr. or his appearance most grievously torment and afflict Mary Walcott, Mercy Lewis, and Ann Putnam Jr. by pinching, twisting, and almost choking them."
Elizabeth Hubbard testified that she hadn't seen the apparition of John Procter until this examination on April 11th. But now he has most grievously afflicted me a great many times by pinching, pricking, and beating me, almost choking me to death, urging me vehemently to write in his book.
Ann Putnam Jr. also testified against John Procter, saying she had seen him with other witches before April 11th, but today was the first day he harmed her.
She said, and then he set upon me most grievously, and did torture me most dreadfully. Also, in the time of his examination, he afflicted me very much, and several times since the apparition of John Procter Sr. has most grievously tortured me by pinching and almost choking me, urging me vehemently to write in his book.
Anne continued, also on the day of his examination, I saw the apparition of John Procter Sr. go and afflict and most grievously torture the bodies of Mistress Pope, Mary Walcott, Mercy Lewis, Abigail Williams, and John Indian.
She finished by noting that John and his wife and Sarah Cloyce kept Elizabeth Hubbard speechless all the time of their examination.
Thomas Putnam and John Putnam Jr. provided their own testimony against John Procter, stating that Mary Walcott, Mercy Lewis, Abigail Williams, Ann Putnam Jr., and Elizabeth Hubbard were often, most grievously tormented and often complaining of John Procter for hurting them.
The two Putnam men added that on April 11th, the girls and women that they had mentioned were much afflicted. They closed by saying, "We verily believe that John Procter, the prisoner at the bar, has many times afflicted and tormented the aforesaid persons by acts of witchcraft," using the same ritualistic language that Thomas had used with his brother Edward in the deposition against Elizabeth Procter.
Thomas Putnam also joined Nathaniel Ingersoll and Samuel Parris in a deposition against all three of that day's suspects, John Procter, Elizabeth Procter, and Sarah Cloyce.
They said that some of the afflicted were much tortured at the examination of John Procter of Salem, farmer, before the honored magistrates the 11th of April 1692, and particularly when Mr. Joseph Pope's wife was several times afflicted. Ann Putnam Jr. and Abigail Williams testified that it was by John Procter aforesaid and his wife Elizabeth, and also when Mercy Lewis was much afflicted at the same examination, said Anne witnessed that it was by said Procter and his wife and Goody Cloyce. Also, when Goody Bibber was much afflicted, Abigail Williams just before cried out, "There is Goodman Procter going to hurt Goody Bibber," and also said Abigail cried out, "There is Goodman Procter going to hurt Mary Walcott," and immediately Mary Walcott was seized with a violent fit.
Bathsheba Pope's husband Joseph testified against John Procter. He said that he heard John Procter say that if Mr. Parris would let him have his Indian, he, the said Procter, would soon drive the devil out of him.
Even after the examination, noteworthy events continued to occur on April 11th. Edward Bishop of Salem Village was riding home from the examination on a horse he was sharing with John Indian, and John Indian had fits on the horse. And Edward Bishop decided that the best thing to do was to beat John twice until his fits subsided.
On her way home to the village, Mary Walcott reportedly saw the specter of Elizabeth Procter, which rode along with them from Gedney's Tavern in Salem town to Philip's Ordinary on the edge of the village. How are those M&Ms?
Yeah, did you have to use a second bag?